and those microorganisms die off, what happens is it actually consumes the oxygen in that system. So what we're going to do is have lots of different layers of a dead zone or hypoxic zone out there in that area of the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, we know that there's a toxic quality of the Corexit and the oil as they mix up, so that's going to be killing a lot of marine life. It's going to be killing the eggs and the larvae and the zooplankton. But then that hypoxic zone also has a huge impact as well. So things that float into a hypoxic zone will likely die. And so the fish that can swim will be able to get away from it. But the overall impact is we've got a very compromised ecology here. And so this area that was so important, and it is so important in the nation, it's been been able to be about a third of all the wild-caught seafood in the United States of America comes from this area and comes from the marshes of Louisiana. And what we know now is that we are absolutely compromising the ability of the Gulf of Mexico to provide that seafood and provide that marine life that really has benefited the nation.
The old adage about dilution is the solution to pollution is something that generally is not considered the appropriate approach to many environmental issues. However, in the case of oil spill technology, unfortunately, it still relies on that. It's old technology. There's really been very little improvement in terms of oil spill cleanup for the last 3 or 4 decades. You can look at documentation from Valdez spill and look at the pictures of what they were doing, and it's essentially the exact same equipment you now see being used in the Gulf of Mexico for this spill in 2010, 30 years later.
In the language of the bills that were passed in response to the Valdez, the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, it says we're going to make sure we get better technology to deal with this in the future. Well, it's the future, and what have you done? Nothing. And that's, I think, one of the most outrageous pieces, is that we've allowed deep water drilling, to just really expand its technology to get at remote oil, but to do nothing to, commensurate with that risk to amp up their ability to respond to the inevitable accidents. $6 billion BP made in the last quarter in profit. Clearly, they could be spending many millions of dollars on safety and developing safety technology and cleanup technology that's adequate.
We asked British Petroleum what it spent on research and development regarding safer offshore drilling technologies. You gave us the number. It was about $10 million a year. That represents 0.0033%, 0.0033% of British Petroleum revenues. That doesn't sound like an adequate prioritization. How does it compare to your compensation?
In what respect? What is the question? Excuse me.
Yeah, British Petroleum is investing about $10 million a year in safer drilling technology. How does that $10 million a year compare to your compensation last year, for instance?
My compensation last year was $6 million.
Forbes reports it at 33. There must be some misunderstanding then. Is that appropriate? The stock options don't count?
They had an article in the newspaper down here saying that they detected traces of oil in the crab eggs. The same issue of the newspaper was announcing the opening of the shrimp season. They told you the seafood was contaminated and then was announcing the opening of the date for you to go get some. That's the most screwed up thing I've ever heard in my life.
Getting over here and tell the truth. Y'all taking the all Jason, you know y'all taking it, you know what y'all doing. Y'all send all the boats, y'all put them in a group at night, we all hear the planes, and the next morning there's nothing but white bubbles. You think we stupid? We not stupid. Y'all putting the all on the bottom of our fishing ground. Y'all not only messing me up now, y'all messing me up for the rest of my life. I ain't gonna live long enough to buy no more shrimp.
We got a bad feeling that for the rest of my life, we'll continue seeing this until somebody in the government forces BP to get out there and clean up the mess that they made. When they was shooting the corrector from underneath the water, they was able to sink a large majority of the oil in that one spot. And what's happening is the oil's coming up, and the natural tides in the Gulf of Mexico is taking it from there and bringing it straight to us. You see, we catch shrimp you can't see shrimp. The reason we know where the shrimp are at is through the tides. So we're very well acquainted with how tides work.
Nobody's ever experimented with that much Corexit and shot at the bottom levels and the top levels at the same time with that kind of oil. So it's a gamble, okay? And it's a gamble that's gonna pay off for them because they're gonna be fined less like we talked about. And what enraged people was seeing the miles and miles and miles of the brown shit floating around. And if you disperse it, you don't see it, you know? And as they dispersed more and more and more, the less people saw it, the more people forgot about it. I'd rather see the brown shit because you can pick it up more readily. You know where it's at. You know what you're facing. You know, here you don't know. You don't know how far it dispersed. You don't know if it got way up in here to our oyster reefs, and that's why we're not procreating. We're not having a spat catch anymore. You know, they said they never used it around here, and I had people telling me that they said oil slicks, they report oil slicks out here. And the next day there was nothing but a sheen. Oh, don't leave that quick. The microbes don't eat it that quick, trust me. What really bothered me was that NOAA and the Coast Guard was, you know, bragging about it and how good it's gonna be. It's the best thing in the world. I said, y'all people are nuts. You know, it's been banned in Europe 3 years ago, and it's good for us. It's good because BP owned the stock in the Corexit place. That's why it was good. They're selling their own stuff. Right now you got more baby bottlenose dolphins dying. You used to have 2 or 3 a month. Now you got 30 or 40. In the same area that they said wasn't impacted. We figured out, you know. But, you know, but once again, there's a lot of biologists I respect saying that, you know, for the long term, that breaking it up gives the microbes a chance to eat it quicker and eat it up. So what do? You know, I mean, I don't study this stuff. I don't understand it. Then I've got seen on the flip side of that, you know, biologists telling me that the bioaccumulation, this shit's gonna screw you up even more down the line than it is now. Can we financially just afford to wait? No. Can you just stop your job and quit working for 2 years and hope, you know? And then they tell you, well, we train you to do other jobs, you know, and they put money into retraining. Nobody went. Nobody wants to, they're retraining people to run electric wires, not electric wires, TV wires, you know, cables. Come on, ain't a fisherman gonna do that, you know? Not scared to work, but we don't want to work in that kind of stuff.
Well, the health concerns, it's the unknowns. We had people working out there for hundreds of days at a time handling that oil. Those are local fishermen, local oil field workers, people that, is it affect their kidneys? We don't know. You would think the federal government would send a mobile medical facility down with some doctors that we control, not BP, and give everybody that worked a physical and look at the days they worked. And maybe this guy worked 200 days and he's got enzymes in his liver. This guy worked 10 days, he really don't have it. But most of the people that work 200 days seem to have some elevated things in there. So it seems like they should want to know and get to the bottom of it. But just like from the beginning, where Coast Guard is running interference for BP, maybe the federal government don't want to know. You know, I can't imagine them not wanting to know the long-term effects.
I would sit on my floor and cry every day because I didn't want my husband or my son out there in that, because I knew, you know, I just knew that it was wrong. There was, you know, they were being exposed to all these chemicals and everything. And then just today when my son was talking about, you know, working on the cleanup with his bare hands and stuff, and I didn't know any of that. And I'm scared to death for it. I'm scared to death for all those people.
We worked out there for 3, almost 4 months with a barge, and we was breaking lines. every day. We went through like 300 feet of rope every week or worse, you know? And you got a barge in a close quarter situation with 100 boats around you, and you break a line, you ain't got time to put on a freaking Tyvek suit and gloves and blah, blah, blah. You gotta run out there, and the freaking hole on the deck was like 1 inch, 2 inches thick on all the ropes and the bits, and you know, you literally swimming in that stuff. We had all on top of the wheelhouse of the boat. We was tied up to the barge, and when the waves would come between the boat and the barge, the hull in the water would shoot up like a geyser between the boat and the barge, and you got freaking all over yourself. It's hot, it's miserable, your freaking eyes are burning. I came down with like the flu. Got sick. I was like 3-4 days I couldn't even get out of bed. Oh, Krause broke down with the flu, you know? It wasn't the flu. I'm not somebody who rarely ever gets sick, you know, in the winter. It's not in the summer, just from being out in them fumes, and your respiratory system was overtaken from being in that mess, you know? They didn't give us no protective gear, BP and them. They just hired a boat and sent us out there, you know?
We live in the United States of America. We fought with these fucking people for months about respirators. I mean, right off the bat, the fight started. Right off the bat. Well, in OSHA law, there's a right to wear voluntary respirator wear. But because BP was the one that held the contracts, our fishermen wasn't allowed to even bring their own respirators to wear them, because BP said that, no, if you wear a respirator, then we will relieve you of your duties. There was a gray haze from the top of the trees to the ground on land. It was an aerosol. The shit was stuck to the outside of our vehicles. This stuff was everywhere. We had guys out here on the boats, their wives calling me, crying, telling me how they're getting sick on the boats where they was burning the oil. People who were on the rigs calling me, begging me to push the issue. So I pushed the issue. I went and had a 2-hour meeting at the Homeland Incident Command Post, which was the command post for the entire region of Louisiana, with a dude from OSHA, a BP safety officer, Rusty Thibodeau, and a safety officer from the Coast Guard. And I mean, for 2 hours, I sat there and hashed it out with these three about putting respirators on anybody and everybody out here that was cleaning up oil. Oh, well, they need to fill out a medical questionnaire. I'm like, where's paperwork? Oh, well, they need a medical evaluation. Well, then let's, you know, bring doctors in and give them all physicals. No big deal. We can bring this fleet in on this day, this fleet in on this day, and make sure they're okay to wear respirators. And why do they need this? Well, to make sure they're safe, to make sure that they are a viable wear. If they had COPD, emphysema, asthma, or enlarged heart, wearing a respirator could cause more medical issues, immediate medical issues, than not wearing one. So I said, well, logic tells me if they have COPD, emphysema, asthma, and enlarged heart, then they shouldn't be out there to begin with. Well, they didn't like that. Why would our government sit back and say, okay, well, would they have like 40,000 people that they say that they hired for this cleanup operation, cover-up operation, we call it? How are you just gonna sit back and say, well, OSHA law says right to wear voluntary respirator wear, but BP's the boss, so they can't wear it.
The average lifespan of a person who did cleanup on the Exxon Valdez is 51 years old. Almost all those people who did work on the Exxon Valdez are now dead. And BP still here once again is big oil, not giving the information to the doctors and the healthcare officials.
My primary focus after the Exxon Valdez was the ecosystem, because that's where my training is. But I kept getting phone calls from people starting in May 1989 These people had worked on the so-called cleanup, and what I began to realize is that people were getting sick out on the spill response. And I thought, how can that be? OSHA's out there, Exxon has a worker safety program, and I thought, maybe there's a linkage. If it made wildlife this sick, what on earth did it do to the people? So the medical doctors explained to me, oh my gosh, Ricky, you had this huge toxic hit in 1989, and people were not properly diagnosed. The Valdez crud is what Exxon called it, colds and flu. And we still don't actually recognize chemical-induced illnesses. And so I realized there's a whole other story here. And I started to work with people, try to piece this story together. And the short of it is that there is a one-sentence exemption in our Occupational Safety and Health Act that deals with oil spills as a hazardous waste cleanup. And in hazardous waste cleanups, the spiller is charged with reporting any and all illnesses except, here's the one-sentence exemption, colds and flu. Because we don't want to sort of contaminate the data set if people are really getting sick from chemical exposure with a simple cold or flu. The problem is, and the oil industry and the chemical industry know this, that our bodies only have so many ways to say we're sick. And the symptoms for colds and flu happen to mimic the symptoms for chemical-induced illnesses. So effectively what that one-sentence exemption does is it nullifies the promise of OSHA that it will protect workers during hazardous waste responses. And the industry knows this, and they're getting away with it right now because they don't want to blow the whistle on themselves and have them as an industry have to pay for long-term monitoring and liability of health problems with thousands and thousands of people.
They are testing the shrimp 400 times more than they were before. And they give them figures out, but the problem is they were only testing 2% before, not even 2% of the whole volume. But biologically, the toxins do not get in the tissue unless it's over a long period of time. And the problem is when they said that the consumption rate is not to where it's going to hurt you, even if there is some toxins in it, but they're using that on a national average. Well, the amount of shrimp we eat compared to the amount of shrimp people eat in Minneapolis or wherever y'all from, big difference. All right? I might eat 5 times more than that average, but they could use that average to tell me everything's safe. So in that respect, we don't know if it's safe or not. That's why one of the reasons I didn't catch my oysters, because I didn't want to put it in commerce. I wasn't sure, because oysters is a filter feeder. It's filtering everything that's coming through that water, And if I'd have put it in commerce and if somebody got sick, then they can come after me. I try to get the FDA to assume liability. So y'all say that everything's fine, you take liability for them. Take liability, they put their head down. So then how can, it's just you in a bad situation. It's not all good and it's not all bad. It's real hard for me to, I'm not going to quantify it and say it's all bad because I can't say that. I've been eating it since even before the spill. My primary concern is this year here, for the people who did not make that much fluid, didn't get a 6-month thing, they got nothing left to do. This shrimp season opens, they gotta go. And if the shrimp happen to pop up where the oil's at, they're gonna catch them in that area. So what effect that's gonna have, we don't know.
It's a tough thing. What I do, I eat it every day. I figure if that way maybe I could get lucky and die and don't have to worry about this no more, If anybody gonna get sick, I'd rather it be me first than, making a bunch of other people sick. The all don't bother me is the chemicals that the government allow them to spray kind of bothers me a little bit. And like I said, I've continually eaten. It's all I've eaten all my life. I'm not gonna change my, I'd pretty much rather be dead if I can't eat seafood. If I had to just eat meat, or I'd just rather not live. That's what I'm used to eating, and if it gets me sick, then I'm gonna stop. I don't wanna make nobody else sick, but I'm not gonna stop. We got some new tests, and we taken, you know, every precaution that's possibly known by man to make sure that it's safe, you know. More paperwork for the rest of our life. We're gonna have to probably bring in, you know, if it ever does get back right, but we're still gonna have more expense than we had before because we're gonna have to bring in other people to do all this stuff, all this paperwork that was put on us by BP, you know.
We're being put through these kind of things simply because BP fouled our waters. We're gonna quit buying fish. We're gonna have to. It's impractical, it's impossible, it's ridiculous. BP is not paying for the testing, okay? So they're paying for advertising for the product, but they're not paying to back up what they're making the little guys do. They're not giving us a dime, you know, to compensate for having to hire new personnel to run these tests or having to buy this, or they're not doing that for us. But they're paying the Louisiana Seafood Promotion and Marketing Board to advertise poison to the American public. I'll never, ever look at seafood again in the same way. I'll never, ever eat it again.
Could have took the last 5 Nobel Prize winners and give them one job, is to run Dean Blanchard out of business, and they couldn't have did a better job than BP as far as timing and exactly what happened. You know, BP came in right before our season was gonna start, they polluted all our water, shut us down. Then they came and they hired all my vessels for a dog and pony show to make people look like they was trying to pick up the oil. But when the vessels tried to pick up the oil, they was told not to pick it up and to go somewhere else and hide. And when the fishermen started complaining about not being allowed to pick up the oil, they fired them and brought in a bunch of contract workers from Texas down here. So another part of my business is I sell ice to the fishermen. I make 130 tons of ice a day. So BP took my fishermen, so I couldn't sell them no ice. But instead of buying ice from me, they brought in ice from out of state. And then I sell fuel to the fishermen. So instead of buying fuel from me, they took my fishermen and made them go buy fuel from a barge from Texas that they put out there in the Gulf that wasn't paying no taxes to the state of Louisiana, didn't have no license to operate over here. And then another part of my business is selling to the tourists. Then the BP came in and rent all the houses that the tourists stay in, so the tourists couldn't come, so they put me out of that part of business. Then they killed my dog. I mean, I don't know what else they could have done for me. Went and slept with my wife, I guess, would have been about the only other thing. I don't know what else. I mean, I ain't got much use for BP. I think BP stands for bad people, you know?
If you told the average American in Nebraska that, you know, some guy was cutting corners on a rig in the Gulf of Mexico, but if you addressed that problem and their gas was gonna go to $4 a gallon, what do you think they'd say? They'd say cut the corner. And I mean, you know, you're talking about some of the highest paid jobs. You know, you can go to work on a rig with just a high school diploma and work as a roughneck and get paid money that somebody in middle America, maybe with a college degree, can't make. So are you gonna be the one that's gonna, you know, blow that whistle? It's kind of hard, you know? And even if you could prove that corners were being cut, if nothing ever happened, what good is it? You've lost your job because something might happen somewhere down the line because you have a feeling that something's not right. You know, until something like this happened, there's no way that anybody would have done anything anyway. So what did it profit you to lose a job?
There was lessons to be learned from the Exxon Valdez by industry, by government, and by the people. And unfortunately, I think that the industry learned the most lessons. And what the industry as a whole learned was that we have got to control the images, and we've got to minimize the appearance of damages, because that will limit our liability in the end. And what we see going on down here is this much more aggressive effort by BP to control the images of the aerial photos, no cameras in the air, no cameras on the beaches, no carcasses. Carcasses are being whisked away by BP subcontractors, BP people. This is all evidence of harm that our federal government and the states in the Gulf region need to prove that this really happened. I mean, we're going to wind up with no public damages because where are they? Where's the evidence?
They didn't want to know, they didn't want you to know how much was really leaking. And anything that quantified that barge, you could have measured how much is in it, how much is coming up, and you could have said from day one that's this much, because it was 100 times greater than what anybody projected.
As soon as BP can sweep this under the rug and make everything believe that they've made it right, as soon as they can do that, then their liability is over. Public perception is everything. And if people believe that the oil is gone, the tar is gone, and the seafood is safe to eat, then BP's liability is over. It's done. We've made it right. Don't you see? And it didn't even cost $20 billion.
Is BP ever going to be held accountable for any of this? Hell no, because almost every one of those little guys that is going to have tested positive for benzene is going to have worked in the oil field somewhere. They're going to have worked in a plant somewhere. They're going to have worked on a barge that pushed benzene. So BP is going to be able to say that there was exposure maybe somewhere else and let themselves off the hook. Because down here, pretty much everybody probably has worked somewhere that's exposed them to something toxic somewhere in their life. And BP is going to be able to pay every Philadelphia lawyer there is to say, oh, you was there, you got contaminated from that. Is it possible? And that's all it takes in a court of law is reasonable doubt, and that's it. They're gonna win every case.
In addition to the criticism of the Obama administration's counting of the barrels of oil, what were the main findings in this preliminary report?
Basically, they were could be embarrassing for an administration that has really prided itself on two things, on scientific rigor and also on transparency in government.
I think that the government business collusion has been so troubling in this. You know, the way the kind of oil spill acts are written and the response plans are written, they leave BP with far too much power, right? And we all experienced that. Everyone was incredibly pissed off and frustrated by how much power BP had and how the government was basically acting like security for BP. You know, the Coast Guard examples, every agency seemed to be basically deferring to BP. Their messaging is what the public is hearing. You know, it's like, oh, gas prices are high right now. That must be because the oil companies are telling us they can't get their permits to drill offshore. That's not why oil prices are high right now. You know, oil is an international, global commodity. There is very little that we can be doing in the Gulf of Mexico to truly move the needle on oil prices. So the public has this very simplified view of how things happen and why you pay what at the pump. And that is being fostered by misinformation from political leadership.
Left him up? Did he leave? That's not a good sign. There's another boat that tried some in this area earlier this morning and he's leaving already.
Katrina, you know, I was on my knees begging for these people to leave me alone. You know, after Katrina, I was about ready to hit the grave. I said, now with the oil spill, I'm in the bed reaching for the plug. You know, it's just, how much more can you take? The failure of the government to force BP to use the proper equipment, you know, that encroaches upon negligent homicide. BP and the government on the subject of the respirators, you know, they were married, whether they wanted to be or not, okay? And the government was in a bad position, you know. I hate to take up for the government because they really haven't done much to help me in my hurricane recovery and stuff like that. We had to fight whatever a little bit. We did get some help now, but we had to fight tooth and nail to get it. I mean, fight, all right? You know, in a hurricane, you had no one to go after. It was a natural disaster. BP did this, okay? And it was their fault, their negligence, any way you want to put it. So it's their responsibility to fix it. I mean, because understand this, people saying, oh, they don't care about that oil. I said, you've got to be slap goofy. I said, do you think that people want that oil blowing out? You know, they're taking their time. I said, they trying anything they can to fix it. But you're 5,000 feet down, you know, with pressure out of the wazoo coming up. You know, it's a miracle it got capped. It really is. But, you know, the government steps into something, it's the worst man-made disaster. They don't have the facilities to control this stuff. You know, a lot of people ridicule the government should have took over the capping of it. What are they going to do? They don't have that kind of equipment. They don't have that kind of knowledge. Now, they should have overseen it more. They should have stopped the Corexit. They failed that pitifully, and what really aggravated us, government entities were supporting the use of the Corexit. EPA told them don't do it, and they kept doing it. So then you feel abandoned. You know, so you come with that same thing, you don't know who to trust. And one of the things we complained about the most was the rampant use of the Coast Guard to do what BP wanted. That was out the box.
You know, the Coast Guard was not there to do what's best for the waterways, the birds, the people. They were there to cover BP's butt. Why? Hopefully one day we'll figure it out.